March 23rd, 5:45 a.m. The first explosion shattered the fragile silence of the early morning, sending a shockwave through the compound. I bolted upright on my cot, my heart pounding as the ground beneath me trembled. The faint pink glow of dawn was smeared across the horizon, but the idyllic scene was obliterated by the roaring chaos outside. Alarms blared, piercing the air with an unrelenting urgency. "This isn't a drill." Price's voice cut through the commotion like a blade as she burst into the barracks. Her face was smeared with soot, her rifle slung across her chest. "The infected are here. Gear up now." I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my Halligan tool and slipping on my tactical vest. Around me, the others moved with practiced efficiency. Maria loaded her rifle with sharp, mechanical motions, her jaw clenched tight. Tucker grunted as he secured a bandolier of shells across his chest, his movements slower than usual thanks to the wound he'd sustained the day before. Green fumbled with her sidearm, her trembling hands betraying the fear she fought to suppress. Outside, the compound roared to life. Soldiers sprinted to their posts, shouting orders as the infected's guttural snarls grew louder. The scent of smoke and blood carried on the wind, an all-too-familiar harbinger of the carnage to come. 5:50 a.m. By the time we reached the perimeter, the scene was nothing short of chaos. The infected swarmed the outer defenses like a tidal wave, their glowing scars casting an eerie light across the battlefield. Turrets blazed, cutting down dozens in seconds, but it wasn't enough. For every infected that fell, two more seemed to take its place. "Where's the Alpha?" Price shouted, scanning the writhing mass beyond the barricades. "It has to be out there somewhere." "There." Calloway pointed, his voice rising over the din. At the edge of the horde, a massive figure loomed, its scars glowing like molten lava. The Alpha's eyes locked onto the compound, and it let out a roar that shook the air. Around it, the infected's movements became more coordinated, their attacks more calculated. "It's directing them," Maria yelled, firing off a burst of rounds that dropped a cluster of infected. "If we don't take it out, we're done for." Price didn't hesitate. "Tucker, Maria, you're with me. We're taking the fight to it." "And the rest of us?" I asked, gripping my Halligan tool tightly. Price met my gaze, her expression hard as steel. "Hold the line." 6 a.m. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of gunpowder as we dug in. The infected slammed against the barricades, their claws raking against steel as they tried to break through. I swung my Halligan tool with all my strength, the impact reverberating through my arms as one of the creatures crumpled to the ground. Beside me, Green fired her sidearm in rapid succession, her shots precise despite the terror in her eyes. "They're flanking us," a soldier shouted, pointing to a section of the wall where the infected had begun to climb over the debris. "Not today," I muttered, charging toward the breach. The first infected lunged at me, its glowing eyes wild with hunger. I swung hard, the Halligan tool connecting with its skull in a sickening crunch. Another followed, and another. Each one fell, but the strain in my arms and the burning in my lungs reminded me that I couldn't keep this up forever. 6:10 a.m. Explosions rocked the battlefield as Price's team engaged the Alpha. From my vantage point, I could see them weaving through the horde, their gunfire cutting a path toward the massive creature. The Alpha moved with terrifying speed, its claws tearing through anything in its path. But Price was relentless, her every shot aimed with deadly precision. "We need reinforcements at the east wall," a voice crackled over the comms. "They're breaking through." Green's eyes widened as she looked at me. "What do we do?" I hesitated for only a moment. "We hold the line, no matter what." We sprinted toward the east wall, joining a group of soldiers desperately trying to repel the attackers. The infected were relentless, their glowing scars casting grotesque shadows as they swarmed the defenses. I swung my Halligan tool with everything I had, the impact sending shockwaves up my arms. Around me, the soldiers fought with grim determination, their shouts blending with the cacophony of snarls and gunfire. 6:20 a.m. The Alpha's roar split the air, louder and more furious than before. I turned just in time to see Price's team closing in on the creature. Tucker fired his shotgun at close range, the blast striking the Alpha's exposed flank and staggering it. Maria followed up with a grenade, the explosion engulfing the creature in a cloud of fire and smoke. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to pause, all eyes on the billowing smoke where the Alpha had stood. Then, with a deafening roar, the creature emerged, its scars glowing brighter than ever. It was wounded, but not defeated. It charged at Price, its claws raised for a killing blow. "No!" I shouted, breaking into a sprint. But before I could reach them, another explosion rocked the ground, and the Alpha let out a final, guttural scream. Price stood over its crumpled form, her rifle smoking, her face streaked with blood and soot. 6:30 a.m. The infected began to retreat, their movements disjointed and aimless without the Alpha's guidance. Soldiers cheered, their voices raw with exhaustion and relief. But as I looked around at the shattered defenses and the bodies, both human and infected, strewn across the compound, I couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was only temporary. Price approached, her steps slow but steady. "We bought ourselves some time," she said, her voice low. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." I nodded, gripping my Halligan tool as I stared out at the horizon. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the smoke, illuminating the battlefield in a harsh, unforgiving light. We had survived the dawn, but the war was far from won. 7 a.m. The battlefield lay eerily quiet in the wake of the retreating infected. Smoke curled into the pale morning sky, carrying with it the acrid stench of gunpowder, blood, and charred flesh. The silence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, heavy with the knowledge that this was merely a pause, not the end. Every breath felt strained, as if the air itself resisted the calm before the inevitable storm. "Everyone stay alert," Price commanded, her voice sharp despite her exhaustion. She stood near the perimeter, her rifle held tightly as her eyes scanned the horizon. This could be a feint. They might come back. I tightened my grip on the Halligan tool, my fingers raw and aching from the hours of battle. Around me, soldiers moved in subdued silence, their faces pale and streaked with soot. The wounded were being triaged near the makeshift infirmary, their groans mingling with the crackle of dying fires. Green sat on a crate nearby, cradling the portable drive in her lap as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Maria paced back and forth, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. Her eyes darted to the horizon every few moments, as if expecting the enemy to materialize out of the smoke. "We need to assess the damage," Calloway said, his voice low as he approached Price. He gestured toward the breached walls and the mangled remains of turrets. "The south wall's gone, and the east is barely holding. We're sitting ducks if they regroup." Price nodded, her jaw tightening. "Do it. Tucker, take a team and secure what's left of the perimeter. Maria, you're on overwatch. If you see anything moving out there, you report it immediately." "Got it," Maria said, her voice clipped. "And us?" I asked, stepping forward. My voice sounded strange, distant, as though it belonged to someone else. Price turned to me, her gaze heavy with unspoken understanding. "We're going to get answers." 7:15 a.m. The command tent was dimly lit, the soft hum of portable generators the only sound as we crowded around the table. The map of the region lay spread out before us, its surface marked with red circles and hastily scribbled notes. Green plugged the portable drive into a laptop, her fingers trembling as she brought up the data we'd risked so much to retrieve. The pale blue glow of the screen illuminated her face, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. "This is everything Orpheus has on their operations," she said, her voice wavering. "Facility locations, production capacities, timelines for deployment. It's all here." "Then we need to hit them," Price said, her tone cold and decisive. "Hard. If we can cripple their command structure, we might stand a chance of turning this around." "It's not that simple," Calloway interjected, leaning over the table. He tapped one of the red circles on the map. "This facility, their main command hub, is buried deep in the mountains. It's a fortress. They'll see us coming a mile away. Then we'll have to get creative, Price replied, her eyes narrowing. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had already considered every angle and found none of them promising. As they debated strategies, my gaze drifted to the flickering screen of the laptop. Lines of data scrolled by, a seemingly endless stream of information that held the key to Orpheus's plans. A chill ran down my spine as a thought occurred to me. What if this is bait? I said, cutting through the conversation. All eyes turned to me, the weight of their attention pressing down like a physical force. Bait? Green echoed, her brow furrowing. Think about it, I said. They let us take this data. They didn't destroy it or encrypt it beyond recovery. What if they wanted us to find this? To lead us into a trap? A heavy silence fell over the room as my words sank in. Price's expression darkened, her jaw clenching as she considered the possibility. It's a risk we can't ignore, she said finally. But we don't have a choice. If we sit here waiting, we're dead anyway. At least this gives us a shot. 7:30 a.m. We left the command tent with a plan, though none of us felt confident in its success. The tension in the compound was palpable as soldiers reinforced barricades and tended to the wounded. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, a grim reminder of how close we had come to falling. Maria stood atop the remains of the south wall, her silhouette stark against the rising sun. She scanned the horizon through the scope of her rifle, her posture tense. The faint glint of sweat on her brow caught the morning light, a subtle testament to the strain she tried to conceal. I climbed up to join her, the steel of the makeshift ladder cold against my hands. See anything? I asked, my voice quiet. She shook her head, her gaze never leaving the distance. Not yet, but it's out there. I can feel it. I didn't doubt her. The silence beyond the walls wasn't natural. It was the kind of quiet that preceded a storm, a deadly calm before the world erupted into chaos once more. The memory of the Alpha's guttural roar echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of how close we had come to annihilation. You think we'll make it? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Maria glanced at me, her eyes hard. We don't have a choice. If we don't, no one else will. Her words hit like a blow, raw and unfiltered. She turned back to the horizon, her fingers tightening around the grip of her rifle. I nodded, gripping the Halligan tool tightly as I stared out at the expanse before us. The rising sun bathed the landscape in golden light, but it felt hollow, like a veneer masking the darkness that still lurked just out of sight. The horizon seemed to mock us, its beauty a cruel contrast to the horrors we knew waited beyond it. If it comes, Maria murmured, almost to herself, we'll be ready. 8 a.m. The sound of engines shattered the uneasy calm. From atop the remains of the south wall, Maria and I peered into the horizon, where a convoy of vehicles approached. Dust billowed in their wake, golden in the morning light, and the low growl of their engines grew louder with each passing moment. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't a simple patrol. We've got company, Maria said, her voice sharp. She raised her rifle, training her sights on the lead vehicle. Her movements were deliberate, steady, but I could see the tension in her knuckles, white against the grip. I grabbed the radio clipped to my vest. Price, we've got an incoming convoy. Looks organized, not infected. Price's response crackled through the static. Hold your fire. Let's see who they are. You're assuming they're friendly, Maria muttered, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Her gaze never left the convoy, her body a coiled spring ready to act. No, I said, watching the vehicles grow closer. She's assuming we need answers. 8:05 a.m. The convoy rolled to a stop just outside the compound. There were 5 vehicles in total, a mix of rugged jeeps and heavily armored trucks. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a man stepped out, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He wore a tactical vest over a worn leather jacket, and a weathered scarf was wrapped loosely around his neck. His face was sharp and angular, marked by a thin scar running down his right cheek that caught the sunlight. Behind him, more figures emerged. They were armed, their weapons held casually, but with a clear sense of readiness. These weren't amateurs. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the compound for threats with the detached efficiency of seasoned fighters. Their silence carried an unspoken confidence that sent a chill down my spine. "Identify yourselves." Price's voice boomed across the yard as she emerged from the gates, flanked by Calloway and Tucker. Her rifle was slung across her chest, her hand resting near the trigger. The weight of authority in her tone left no room for misunderstanding. The man raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "Name's Harker," he said, his voice calm and steady. "We're not here to fight." "Then what are you here for?" Price demanded, her tone unyielding. The soldiers on the walls tightened their grips on their weapons, ready for the slightest misstep. Harker's lips curled into a faint smile. "Same thing you are. Survival." 8:10 a.m. The tension in the air was palpable as the two groups faced off. Soldiers on the walls trained their weapons on the newcomers, while Harker's people stood their ground, unfazed. It was a standoff, balanced on the edge of a knife, and every second felt like an eternity. A wrong move from either side would mean bloodshed, and the weight of that possibility pressed heavily on everyone. "You'll forgive us if we don't take your word for it," Price said. "Trust is in short supply these days." Harker nodded, his expression unreadable. "Fair enough, but I'm betting you've seen what's out there. The infected are changing, becoming more organized. And I'm betting you know who's behind it." Price's eyes narrowed. "What do you know about Orpheus?" Harker took a step closer, his hand still raised. "Enough to know they're a threat to all of us, and enough to know we can't fight them alone." The weight of his words hung in the air. Price glanced at Calloway, who gave a subtle nod. Reluctantly, she lowered her weapon. "You want to talk? Fine, but you're not coming inside armed." Harker gestured to his people, and one by one, they began to disarm, placing their weapons in a pile near their vehicles. The sight of it did little to ease the tension, but it was a start. The clatter of weapons hitting the ground felt unnervingly loud against the silence that followed. 8:20 a.m. Inside the command tent, the atmosphere was no less charged. Harker stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on the edge as he studied the map spread before him. Price, Calloway, and I watched him closely, our distrust evident. The faint hum of the portable generator underscored the tense quiet, every sound amplified in the cramped space. "Orpheus isn't just experimenting," Harker began, his tone grim. "They're building armies. The Alphas are just the beginning. They've got something bigger in the works, something designed to wipe out anyone who resists." "You've got specifics?" Price asked, her voice cold. Harker met her gaze. "Not everything, but we've intercepted enough to know their main facility is in the mountains. You've probably seen the same data." Price didn't respond, but her silence was confirmation enough. "Then you know we have to act fast," Harker continued. "Every day we wait, they get stronger. They're not just coming for us, they're coming for everyone." "And what's in it for you?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. Harker's expression didn't waver. "The same thing you want. A chance to survive. A chance to fight back." 8:30 a.m. The meeting ended with no clear resolution. Harker and his people were given temporary clearance to stay outside the walls, their weapons locked away under guard. Price and Calloway remained wary, their skepticism palpable. As Harker left the tent, his eyes lingered on the map for a moment too long, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. As I walked back to the barracks, my mind raced. Harker's story aligned too well with what we already knew, and that made it all the more unsettling. If he was lying, it was an elaborate ruse. If he was telling the truth, we were up against something far worse than we'd imagined. Maria caught up to me, her steps quick and light. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice low. Her expression was guarded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I hesitated. "I think he's dangerous, but I think he's right." She nodded, her expression dark. "Then we'd better be ready, because if he's right, we're going to need all the help we can get." I looked back toward the convoy, where Harker and his people stood, their faces unreadable in the shifting light. The shadows stretched long across the ground, a reminder that even in daylight, the darkness wasn't far away.